Hi, I'm back for another podcast episode. So I wanted to do one of those dramatic intros where I come in with a ton of finished knits in my hands, and you guys are so overwhelmed with how many things that I have and how productive I've been in the last couple of months since I last made a podcast episode. But the truth is, I think this looks a little bit underwhelming because I'm missing my biggest FO, which I'll elaborate on in a minute. But welcome back to my channel. My name is Emma, aka Midsummer Knits Dream, and I make videos about knitting and fiber arts content. Today's video is going to be a little knitting podcast talking about what I've been working on, what I finished since my last podcast episode, and then later on we'll dive into some media that I've been consuming and just things going on in my life. So if you've never been here before, welcome. I would really appreciate it if you checked out my videos and subscribed to my channel if you liked them. And I'm really happy that you're here. So as I was sitting down to start planning out this video and what I was going to talk about, I realized that it has been quite a while since our last podcast episode. My last podcast episode was posted on December 7th, and it is now nearly at the end of January. So by the time I post this, it's probably going to be very close to 2 months since my last podcast episode. Which is quite a while. I normally try and post one like once a month, but just in the past couple of months I've been pretty busy with traveling and things, so I haven't been posting as many YouTube videos, and so posting a podcast episode just sort of fell to the wayside. And so I'm finally here back to give you guys an update on all the things I've been working on. If you already follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen all of these projects that I'm going to talk about except for one, but if not, you should go and check out my Instagram. I post a lot more work in progress updates there and sort of behind the scenes content versus what you see here on YouTube. But let's go ahead and get into some updates in terms of my knitting. So first update that I have to give you guys, which is also the missing piece of knitting that I wasn't able to actually include and show you guys in this video since I don't have it with me, is the ayami sweater that I made for my mom for Christmas. So I posted an entire video walking you guys through the process of me making this, basically just vlogging every step, and I'm going to go ahead and link that above if you're interested in watching it. But unfortunately I don't have this knit with me anymore since I actually gave it to my mom and now she has it in Virginia and I'm back in California. So I can't show you guys this piece at the moment, but I'll pop up some pictures of it, and especially of my mom in it. She looks so good in it and I am so happy with how it came out. So if you have seen my vlog talking about the process of making this, you'll know that I was knitting it specifically to give to my mom for Christmas, and it was a little bit of a time crunch. So I tried to start the sweater in October and then I ended up switching patterns because the pattern that I chose didn't really work out with my yarn. So I ended up restarting it with a new pattern in late November. So I had around a month to finish this in time for Christmas. And clearly, in retrospect, it wasn't going to be that big of a deal if I didn't finish in time for Christmas. I was staying in Virginia until New Year's Eve, so I had several days where I could have finished the sweater and still given it to my mom and it would have been totally fine. But this was more of like a self-imposed deadline where I was like, I really want to finish this to give it to my mom on Christmas morning. And so spoiler alert, I did finish on time for Christmas. I finished on December 23rd, which meant I had just enough time to block it and then wrap it up for Christmas. And it fits my mom absolutely perfectly. Again, I will include some pictures because it fits her so much better than it fit me. I was actually just trying on the sweater while I was making it because we are somewhat similar sizes and I wanted to see if it was on the right track. And even though it fit me, it fits her so much better and it looks so much better on her. So I'm really happy with how that came out and I'm really happy that she likes it. In terms of how much I liked working with the pattern and the yarn that I was working with, I loved the pattern. The pattern is called Ayami by Isabel Kramer, and it was just really well written, really enjoyable to knit. The yoke has these really interesting cables that are two sort of different types of cables. So they have more of a herringbone pattern, and then it goes into these normal like twisted cables and then back into the herringbone pattern. So I feel like it was just very interesting to knit, and I think in the finished product it also looks very good. So I had a really fun time knitting this one. Aside from that yoke pattern, it was mostly stockinette. So it was pretty fun to just knit along in it, watch some TV, have a little bit more of a chill project, because a lot of my projects lately, for example, some of the things I've been designing, have been a little bit more like projects that you have to think about, and so it's always nice to have a little bit more of a relaxing project that you can do as well. And so I definitely really enjoyed knitting this pattern. The yarn, which was Dream in Color Classy, I had a little bit more issues with, just in that each skein of the yarn was pretty different, so I had to sort of fade it in, and there is sort of still a visible line on the yoke of the sweater where I switched from one skein to the other because I didn't feel like frogging it just to fix that one small line. So definitely in the future when I work on projects with hand-dyed yarn, I'm going to keep this in mind and always sort of be alternating the yarn when I am switching skeins so that it's not too harsh of a line when I switch skeins. But that was one issue that I faced a little bit while I was knitting this sweater. All in all, I feel like the project went pretty well. The only real issues, like I mentioned, were with the yarn looking a little bit different from skein to skein, but I feel like I resolved that pretty well and it ended up looking pretty good. My next FO, which I have sort of mentioned and teased a couple of times before, I definitely mentioned it in my last podcast episode, is my second groovy tank. So as you can see, this is now an FO. And when I say an FO, I feel like that's a little bit misleading because I might actually redo the straps of this to be a little bit wider, but I think that won't take too long, maybe like an hour tops. So this is, for the most part, an FO. I'll put up some pictures of this one up on the screen because I grabbed some pictures of it outside in the snow, which is quite cold, but I am really excited about this one. So as you guys know, I finished the first draft of my groovy tank last year in the summer. I will put a picture on the screen, and this is a project that I've been working on for quite a while. It's a design of my own, and it is knit using fingering weight yarn and size US 1 needles, which are quite tiny, so it took me quite a while to make in the first place. And then once I completed that one, I wanted to make a second one just to finalize some details of the pattern, as well as get a second sample so that people can see different options of what the tank top could look like depending on how you want to knit it and sort of style it. So this one is a bit tighter, and I also knit it a bit more cropped, so it is a little bit more of like a bralette style as opposed to a tank top. This is another FO that I'm very excited about, and specifically about getting this pattern out. I actually saw a comment on my groovy tank video the other day asking if I had decided not to put the pattern out, which is totally valid because it's been about 6 months since I made that first draft of the tank top. But I have been working on it, I promise you guys. I feel like I've gotten a little bit distracted with other things, and that's why it hasn't been as fast of a process as I hoped it would, but I genuinely have been working on the pattern. I actually was working on it this weekend, and I'm working with a tech editor to sort of grade the sizes and to get this pattern looking as good as it possibly can. So I am pretty excited about this one. I think I'll be able to do a testing call relatively soon, probably sometime in February. And then after that, I'll probably be able to release the pattern in spring or summer. So I know this has been a really long time coming for you guys. It's been even longer coming for me. But I am working on it, and I promise you I'm actually making some progress on it this weekend specifically. Next up, I have my current work in progress, which is going to be a little bit of a mysterious one because I don't want to show you guys too many details. So in terms of showing this work in progress in my video, I sort of compromised with myself and said that I would only show the back of it and not show the front, which is the part that has my actual sort of like unique design. So this is the back of what I'm currently working on. This is a new design that I'm working on, which, as I mentioned, I've been a tiny bit distracted from the groovy tank, but I promise I'm working on both. This is going to be a tank top. Technically I cast on for this on January 1st, but then I took a little bit of time away from this to work on the groovy tank again, as well as my hexagons for my beekeeper's quilt, just because this is a design of my own that I'm trying to design and figure out. And so I've had to frog many times, and it can be a little bit frustrating, and I can definitely tend to need breaks from it. I think I am at the point where hopefully nothing else will go wrong, fingers crossed, and I'll be able to finish this one up in the next few weeks. But I am really excited to show you guys this. Again, just showing the back for now, but I'm really excited to show you guys this once it's a finished design. I am curious, by the way, if you're a designer, do you show your designs while you're still in the work in progress phase, or do you wait until it's completely finished? For me, with the groovy tank and now this tank top design, I'm a little bit hesitant to show the design before I'm actually done. I don't know why that is. I don't necessarily think that I'm scared of someone stealing my design idea or anything, but I think I'm a little bit nervous to show a design before it's done because maybe I won't end up completing it, or something will go terribly wrong and I'll have to totally switch elements of it, and it's just like a little bit vulnerable for me to actually show that design while it's still a work in progress. So I apologize for not actually showing you guys what I've been up to, but rest assured I think it will be ready for a reveal very soon. So that is it for my knitting updates, but up next I have my little media segment where I talk about what media I've been watching in the past couple of months since I last made a podcast, and I actually have a ton of updates to give you guys on this front. If you guys want to skip ahead of this section, that is totally understood, by the way. If you guys want to hear about them, that's totally great. But I also realize that not everyone's here to hear about what I've been reading and watching, so if not, you can go ahead and skip ahead and I won't take offense to it. I actually wrote them all down so that I wouldn't forget any of them. The first one being that I finally finished watching Supernatural. I've been talking about this in my podcast episodes since I started my channel, which was about 6 months ago. And I'd actually been watching Supernatural for basically a year by the time I finished it. So it was definitely a little bit of a bittersweet moment to finish the TV show, especially in terms of my knitting. I feel like I've seen Supernatural as like this comfort show that I can watch whenever I'm knitting, and just like it'll be a chill, fun time. I don't have to put much effort into like finding a new show since Supernatural is so long, and it's just been a really fun journey to embark on in the past year. I do have a few thoughts on the finale, but I don't want to bore you guys with too many thoughts about Supernatural because I'm guessing most of you have not watched it. So if you have, you could totally DM me and we can talk about the finale. I'm honestly curious to hear what the general reaction to the finale was, because I was obviously watching the show a good while after it came out. The finale came out in 2020. So I'm really curious what the general reaction was to it when it actually came out. I'm guessing people were probably not happy with it for the most part, but I am really curious if you were a Supernatural fan at the time, what people thought about it, what the general sentiment was towards it, and what you think about it. So feel free to DM me if you have any thoughts about that. So I feel like every time I finish any sort of series, whether it's a TV show or a book series, anything that I've been somewhat emotionally invested in, I will need a little bit of a break before I start on something new. And I just need a little bit of time to sort of like mourn the ending of that prior series. So that happened to me with like Gilmore Girls, every time I've reread Harry Potter or The Hunger Games, or any of those sort of series where you get sort of emotionally invested in the characters. And that definitely was the case for Supernatural as well. So I went a little bit without watching too much TV. Actually, just within the last couple of weeks, I finally did pick up another TV show. I just finally watched Ted Lasso, which I know I'm also late to that game, but I really enjoyed it. It was such a fun TV show, and I'm super excited for season 3, which is coming out very soon. So I'm glad that I finally picked it up in time for season 3 to come out in the next couple of months. Ted Lasso is definitely another fun TV show where you can watch it and have an enjoyable time every single episode, but at the same time feel yourself growing like an emotional attachment to each of the characters. So I am really glad that there's going to be another season coming out and I don't have to mourn the loss of another TV show, but I do wonder if the next season is going to be the finale. We'll see, but that is it for my TV show updates for now. And I do have a couple of books that I also wanted to talk about. So in terms of books, I've actually read a good number of books since my last podcast episode. Like I mentioned, my last podcast was posted in early December, and I'm somewhat big on doing a Goodreads reading challenge every single year. So my Goodreads challenge for last year, 2022, was to read 30 books because I had read more than 30 books in 2021 and thought it was a very realistic goal. But at the same time, I spent a lot of last year knitting and less time reading. So it was actually quite tricky for me to hit that goal, and I ended up reading a bunch of books in late December. So I do have a number of books that I've read, and I will put a screenshot of my Goodreads on the screen so you can see which books I've read recently. But there are only two that I really strongly wanted to talk about in this podcast episode. The first one being Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So Taylor Jenkins Reid is very well known in sort of the online reading community. So if you guys have ever heard of Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Daisy Jones and the Six, any of those books, those are all by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I feel like she has sort of this cult following with a lot of the people who are pretty online but also enjoy reading books. I feel like all of her books are pretty easy and enjoyable to read, but at the same time you really form this like emotional attachment to the characters while you're reading it, and I feel like that's her real strength, is building these characters that are so lovable and make you feel so drawn into the story. And I've read a number of her other books, but Carrie Soto is Back is actually one of my favorite, if not my favorite books from her. I think it's up there with The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is a very iconic book and a lot of people love that one. But I actually read Carrie Soto is Back as an audiobook, which means that I had a lot of time to knit while I was listening to it. And the audiobook was really well done. The voice actors did such a good job, and I feel like this would have been enjoyable as a book as well, but I really did like it as an audiobook. I feel like this story was just very compelling to me. As I mentioned, I feel like Taylor Jenkins Reid's biggest strength is creating these characters that you feel really attached to. And I read her book Malibu Rising, which is the book that she put out prior to putting out Carrie Soto's Back. And I feel like that book was actually her weakest book that I've read because it was split across multiple different characters' point of views. And her books are not ridiculously long. I'd say they're like an average length, maybe like 300, 400 pages. So I feel like because it was switching perspectives so often, we didn't really get to build as much of a rapport when it came to each of the characters. And so for me, Malibu Rising is one of my least favorite books by her that I've read, versus Carrie Soto is Back. I feel like she sort of leaned in the opposite direction. She really leaned into building the personalities of, first of all, Carrie Soto, obviously, as well as a couple of people who are close to her. And as opposed to Malibu Rising, where there were 4 different perspectives and 4 different main characters who all had these different motivations and different things going on throughout the book, I feel like in Carrie Soto is Back, although each of the characters had their own motivations, it was just like a very strong story built around Carrie Soto and her motivations and her goals, and these other characters obviously had wants and desires of their own, but they supported Carrie so well that I feel like we came to love them as individual characters of their own through that lens of seeing them support Carrie and be there for Carrie. So I don't know if that made too much sense, but I just wanted to say that this was an amazing book and especially a good audiobook. So I would recommend, if you're looking to get into audiobooks this year, especially to listen to while you're knitting, I highly recommend this one. So this next book that I wanted to talk about, I had to run upstairs and grab because I wanted to show you guys the book itself. It is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and just wait for this. It's pretty big. This copy that I have, the pages are very small, which I found a little bit annoying actually, but it's over 1,200 pages and it actually took me around 6 months to finish this book. I started it in July of last year, but I'm gonna tell you guys it was so worth it and I would read it again in a heartbeat. I'm actually waiting on the sequel to come so I can start on that because this was such a good book and I'm super excited to read the sequel. But I wanna give this book as an example of multiple point of views being done right. And to some extent, I think that's because of the length of the book. It has so much time to establish these sort of lead characters and give us a reason to root for them, but it is really masterfully done. And to also give a little short description of what this book is about. Overall, this is a very epic fantasy book. I haven't read a ridiculous amount of fantasy, at least fantasy that is intended for adults to read. I've probably read like 5 or 6 fantasy books in the past few years, so I'm not necessarily used to all of the challenges that come with reading fantasy books. The first thing being that I feel like it can take quite a while for you to get immersed into the story because there's just so much going on and so much is being introduced to you at once. So this book, for example, I really did struggle to get into it. As I mentioned, it took me 6 months to read, and part of that is because there was so much like kind of setting up the story and trying to understand the universe and understand the characters and their motivations and all of these things that was very slowly built upon. And so it took me a while to get through that. Another thing is that towards the end of 2022, I simply gave up on reading this because as I mentioned, I was really interested in getting to my Goodreads reading goal, and so I figured this was not going to be the easiest book to check off my list. So I ended up picking it back up in the new year once I had hit that reading goal, and I'm so glad I did because I feel like the story towards the last like third of the book just becomes really, really compelling. You get really invested in these characters and you can't wait to see what happens. So I really enjoyed this book. I'm definitely going to read the sequel next, and I believe Brandon Sanderson said this is going to be like a 10-book series, which is going to be very epic and very exciting, and so I'm really excited to continue reading the series. I would also love to know if you guys have book recommendations, specifically any fantasy book recommendations. Like I mentioned, I haven't read a ton of fantasy, but I do really love it, so I'd love to get other recommendations. So that is it for my podcast episode today. Thank you so much if you are still watching. I really appreciate it, and I would appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell notification to be notified whenever I post. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!